What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Saturday morning edition of the College Football Show here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you for what should be another pretty exciting slate of college football action. We've got the usual slate on DraftKings with, about 13 games on the main slate there. We've got some of the night games over on Fanduel. Not quite as good a matchups as what we saw last week, but still some interesting games and spots to talk about. I am Justin Van Zuden, aka STL Cardinals 84. I've got Micah Bedard alongside me as usual. Micah, how was your week? What's going on?
Doing good, man. Thanks for holding it down without me last week. But a fun slate. A lot of DraftKings, spots where running back is super soft, wide receiver is super thin. So interesting building lineups this week. What you want to do? So excited to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of stuff to talk about, and lineups do come together fairly easily today. So we'll get into that for you. We'll take your questions if you've got some here over the next 45 minutes or so, and get you set for lineup lock at 12 o'clock Eastern time. So I will bring up our lineup HQ tools here as usual, and we can roll through the positions. As far as injury news today, we've had, quite a few injuries throughout the middle part of the college football season. Obviously, this is the time of year where teams are banged up. Pricing isn't horribly off, I guess, but we do have a few things to monitor today. Adrian Martinez is a game time decision for Kansas State against Oklahoma State, and that's a late afternoon start, so you probably will see a lot of people ignoring that spot today. Jackson Smith and Jigba has already been ruled out for Ohio State. Just can't fully recover from his hamstring injury, so he is out for the Buckeyes today. Richardson for Oklahoma State, potentially questionable for their game this afternoon. Probably nobody's playing Georgia Tech, so we don't really have to worry about Jeff Sims, but he is questionable as well. Any other injuries and news that you're monitoring? Florida State running back situation, probably another one as well.
Yeah, I just saw that. I think Trayshawn Ward, you mentioned Florida State, is not warming up for them. So it's probably going to be Toafili and Trey Benson in that backfield. And I know a lot of people are looking there for value, especially with Toafili after he saw a ton of snaps last week. But we'll get into that with the running backs in terms of between him and Benson. I think Benson's a really good play if Ward's not going to go. That's really all you're looking for in the window. I think they had mentioned that TCU might be down some starters. I don't know if they're on offense or defense, but I think that was mentioned a little bit earlier on game day. So that's really all to monitor kind of in the early games, injury news or anyone you're watching going up to those ones.
All right, so let's go ahead and start digging into the positions here. At quarterback, we've got a lot of high upside plays as usual. We've got a pretty even dispersion in terms of salary this week and pretty even in terms of ownership. If you look at our projected ownership, basically for everybody that fits on my screen here, nobody above 12% of all these quarterbacks above 8K. So basically you're going to see a lot of people maybe starting lower, going with some mid-range quarterbacks today. And this could be the case at a lot of positions. The balanced build does kind of work nicely today. So we can kind of get into the mechanics of that. But as far as these top-end quarterbacks, I mean, you're basically getting low ownership on almost everybody. So is there, of the quarterbacks here above 8K, who stands out for you?
Yeah, I mentioned in my article, my boy Bo Nix has not put up since the Georgia game, he has not put up less than 32 fantasy points. Continued it last week. Didn't even get there really on the ground. I think he threw for maybe 5 touchdowns. But I mean, he's definitely in play. I mean, he'll be in the pool. Like you said, a lot of these guys, the build this week is going to go 2 cheap quarterbacks, put in a couple stud running backs, and play Xavier Hutchinson, I think, at the wide receiver spot. So we'll get to that. So, yeah, some of these guys are going to be way under-owned for what they should be. John Reese Plumlee last week on the night slate, what was he, like 50% owned, and he snowballed. So people are going to be hesitant to go back to him. I really like him as a GPP play. CJ Stroud, I mean, last week, one of the worst matchups you can have, and he didn't necessarily get there, but they had a couple defensive touchdowns. He had a couple short fields. The ball was kind of spread out. I like going right back to him here against Penn State. So Stroud, Sam Hartman, Jaden Daniels put up 51 points last week. Hartman put up 43, so he kind of got lost in the shuffle. Once again, going against Louisville, their defense is nothing crazy. So I like those guys. Stetson Bennett might even make my pool as well. So all these guys above 8K are going to be, none of them are going to be chalky. So, I mean, you think of a guy like CJ Stroud, you can get 15, 20%, and you might be 2-3 times the field, which is something crazy when you consider a couple weeks ago how chalky Ohio State was. So these guys are definitely a way to get different. And I think there are definitely ways to build lineups to get some of these guys in. And I'll be overweight on definitely Stroud, Hartman, and JRP in the main slate.
Yeah, I like those calls. Hartman, I think that game could be a potential shootout today. You got Cunningham on the other side looking to rebound, and that Louisville team has been a bit of an enigma. So I think that game you could see some back and forth in that one. So I like Hartman as well. Plumlee, you mentioned coming off the dud, not the best matchup, but in terms of ceiling, hard to argue against him at 6% ownership. So I like those guys. Max Duggan has been kind of a revelation there for TCU. That game, another one that could shoot out, and I think he is, if we sort by fantasy points, he is our highest projected in terms of gross fantasy points. We didn't even get to Cunningham yet, right at 8K. Another guy that fits that same mold, though, of a quarterback with some upside if everything goes right. And you can play, you could do the game stack type of build in a GPP where you've got both Cunningham and Hartman. And hope you get, a 45-42 type of game there. And it just, it goes to show you that most people are going cheaper at quarterback this week because from there, basically you're down into the sub 7Ks, and that's where we start to get maybe a little bit more ownership. KJ Jefferson, Garrett Schrader, and the likes of those guys, down in the 6Ks. Anything else for these higher end quarterbacks that you want to pass along?
Yeah, I didn't mention Malik just because, he wasn't in that picture. There's so many good options above 8K. And, he struggled a little bit coming back from concussion. But before he got knocked out with a concussion, he had fantasy point totals between 29 and 43 points. Wake Forest is not a team that's going to shut you down. So I definitely like Malik Cunningham, Sam Hartman with a run back with A.T. Perry. You don't really have to play a receiver, but Cunningham is great for GPPs. I still think he comes in a little bit under that 14% too. But even 14% is not going to put you off a guy at all. So I definitely like him of that, 8K and above range.
Yeah, definitely don't need to worry too much about ownership in this range. Play who you like. Go from there. I know you mentioned in your article as well that you're kind of off of Oklahoma State today, and I do agree. I think Kansas State, they obviously got a question mark at quarterback depending on who's going to play today. They're at home. They're going to try to control the ball, give it to Deuce Vaughn, kill the clock a little bit. Oklahoma State, tough road spot after a big win. I've been on Sanders for the better part of the last month, but I think this is the spot maybe where you shy away from some of those Oklahoma State guys a little bit as well. All right, so let's go ahead and move down into this mid-range where the ownership is going to start to congregate. And boy, I mean, just 6,300, like that just seems way too cheap for Jefferson, and he's probably the chalk overall quarterback today.
Yeah, I mean, Auburn is a different matchup than BYU. I mean, BYU's defense is just awful this year. You saw them last night lose to ECU. And KJ Jefferson, although it was kind of scary, I don't know if you watched the end of that game. For some reason, they're up 24 and they run a QB sneak on the outside. And KJ literally just coming off a concussion falls directly on his head. And, he got a bye week, so I think he'll be fine. But, yeah, he's just too cheap here. Him and Rocket Sanders for this game environment. I think that game is kind of sneaky. I mentioned in my article there aren't really any standout games. I think the highest total game is maybe 68. This one's right there at 62. Neither of these defenses, Arkansas's defense is not good either. So I really like KJ Jefferson. Will Howard also for Kansas State. I mentioned I don't think Adrian Martinez is going to go today. So Howard he's a big boy. I mean, he's basically almost like a 6'5" fullback out there. So I think they lean a little bit more on Deuce, but I think you saw last game that he got Deuce a little bit more involved in the passing game. So I like Howard as well. Schrader, same thing. DraftKings just refuses to price him up. They don't have the best matchup against Notre Dame, but he can run in 3 with his legs and easily pay off value. Anthony Richardson, I want to play him so bad. I don't think I can after last year. It would not shock me at all after he was so terrible. I think he was in this exact same spot last year. He was really cheap. I think that was his first start of the season maybe that they gave him against Georgia.
That sounds right.
And it was just terrible. So I don't think I'm going to get to him. I don't have as many lineups as I usually do, but it would not be out of the realm of possibility for Anthony Richardson to account for like if Florida does score 4 touchdowns to account for all of them. So I think he is a sneaky GPP play. I don't think I'll get there myself, but this would be the week that you don't play Anthony Richardson at 2% ownership and he goes off. So I think of these guys, you mentioned KJ is the clear chalk and the clear obvious option here. And I think he's going to be very popular in cash and single entries, and for good reason.
You mentioned the totals in these games. Ohio State and Penn State is 60.5. Notre Dame and Syracuse is 48. TCU and West Virginia is 69. That's the highest. Arkansas, Auburn, 60.5. Oklahoma, Iowa State, 58. Georgia Tech, Florida State, 48. Let's see. Oregon, Cal, 56.5. Oklahoma State, Kansas State, 56. Florida, Georgia, 56.5. Wake, Louisville, 65. Cincinnati, UCF, 56. So, basically you're looking at Wake, Louisville is 65. TCU, West Virginia is 69. And then Arkansas, Auburn, Ohio State, Penn State in the kind of right at 60, 61. So, yeah, not a lot of shootouts, nothing in the 70s, and not a lot of games that, people are just going to go looking at for clear game stacks. And that does provide some opportunity, without as many people stacking up games this week. If you do hit the one game that happens to be 45, 42, probably not going to be a week where we see 4 or 5 of those. So you do have some potential upside if that happens. So agree on Jefferson, assuming he should be a full go, and he's just at 6,300, going to grade out super well from a points per dollar perspective. And a lot of people might go there as their QB1. You mentioned the popular build probably being 2 cheap QBs this week, and you look at all the guys under 6K. You've got Schrader at 5,900, you've got Deckers at 5,300, you've got Ashford at 5,200, all grading out very well in terms of if I sort the quarterbacks by point per dollar, you can see Ashford, Jefferson, Schrader, Deckers, Will Howard, who you just mentioned, all in that mix as the best point per dollar options at quarterback. So if you had to pick among Schrader, Deckers, Ashford, do you have a preference?
Yeah, I mean, Turtle and I were talking about this week. Like, if Robbie Ashford cannot put up 25, 30 fantasy points here, or like if he gets benched in this game, I think he needs to consider another position, because Arkansas is as good of a matchup for a quarterback as you can have. Ashford, if you watch him play, he's more of a runner than a thrower. But I mean, Arkansas is just giving up points to anybody. If Jaron Hall doesn't get hurt against them a couple weeks ago, he probably breaks the slate. He had like 30 points at halftime, I think. But I love Ashford today, which is very scary. He'll probably be the highest owned quarterback, him and KJ. I love stacking that game up because you can get the access to 2 dual threat guys for under 6.5K. But you mentioned it, right? Look at those 5 guys, and then you get the higher price, quarterbacks. So there will be also popular mix and match play like a Duggan and Deckers or something. I'm kind of off Deckers. I'll get to that when we talk about Xavier Hutchinson. I think that Iowa State has seen this Oklahoma defense and how vulnerable they are against the run. And not to say that, Deckers can't have a good game, but if you compare him to Ashford, he's a good pivot off of him. But now that I see that ownership, like if Deckers was going to be 10% owned and Ashford was going to be 25%, I'd say Deckers is a lot better play. But if they're not that far off in ownership, Deckers is not going to, run for 100 yards, and Ashford has that upside. So Deckers I'm underweight on in GPP, and I think those 2 guys, Ashford and Jefferson, are my 2 highest owned quarterbacks. But I do have a good sprinkle in those high price guys we talked about too.
Yeah, there is leverage on those high-priced quarterbacks and GPPs this week for sure, given the fact that most people are going cheap, and that's the reason for that low ownership that we discussed just a bit ago. All right, let's go ahead and move to the running back position, where for whatever reason nobody is priced above $7,500. I mean, there was these weeks, where Bijan Robinson was 9K and Ibrahim was 8.5K, and then you disappeared from there. But Chase Brown, who is averaging like 65 carries a game, is only $7,500. And I mean, seriously, I think he's averaging like 28 carries a game, but whatever. He's getting the ball a ton, and Illinois is ranked inside the top 20. So they're not going to go away from what's working. And the guy's getting the ball 30 times, and he's only $7,500. Like, this is a don't overthink it spot, and you just plug Chase Brown into your lineups, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that 38% is low. Like, I'll say, like, I will take it if Chase Brown is 38%. I'm going to have upwards of 80% of him. I'm not going to completely lock him just because this is college football. And we saw Cam Rising on Thursday night, just no notice and just not put his helmet on and play, which is why I haven't been playing a lot of midweek slates. But yeah, Chase Brown got 41 carries in a terrible matchup against Minnesota and still put up, 35, 40 fantasy points. Now he gets the complete opposite of a matchup with it being a favorite on the road against Nebraska, who has gotten a little bit better on defense, but Brown is going to get fed. Uh, he should be 9K. I'd play him at 9.5K. Same with Mo Ibrahim. I mean, what's DraftKings doing after Minnesota is down 20 the whole game and still running Ibrahim? Ibrahim still had 100 yards when they lose by 30. So he flips that game script all the way around. Now he's a favorite against Rutgers at home. I mean, I don't see any reason, like in single entry, like these two guys are in my lineup for sure. I mean, obviously you're going to eat a lot of chalk with them, but I mean, I would say the floor between Brown and Ibrahim is 50 points between the two. So, I mean, if you could say I can plug in 50 points, like it's different if Ibrahim's 9K and Brown's 8K, but I mean, they're far too cheap. Him being like, Ibrahim being $200 more than Eric Gray and $100 more than Maya Williams, like DraftKings is just giving up on Eric Gray. Like they're like, DraftKings must think Eric Gray is
just going to get the same price every week.
Yeah, and that's frustrating with Oklahoma, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, and Sean Tucker too is a great option. But yeah, Brown and Ibrahim are too cheap. I'm just going to eat the chalk and look away with them, and that's why you'll see, if you want to play both of those, obviously they're not cheap, but they should be in the 8-9Ks, and so you're getting a huge discount with those two guys.
Yeah, for sure. It's a don't overthink it spot. Certainly, you can play both. Lots of good running back options today. I mean, you can get pivots away from them for sure in tournaments. Deuce Vaughn actually we have him with a higher projection than Ibrahim, given the uncertainty with Kansas State at quarterback. Maybe they just feed him today. Sean Tucker, how will Syracuse respond after that kind of collapse last week in the second half? Always an interesting discussion. We mentioned Sanders already in a good spot, potentially a pivot away in some GPP builds if you're not playing Jefferson. But these guys, the problem is that they're just not that big of a discount. It would be an easier discussion if Chase Brown was 9K and then, okay, these guys are pivots away from him. But with Brown only being 7,500 and these guys still being 7K, obviously, if you're building the optimal lineup, you're probably just putting Brown in there. But for GPPs, you can have the discussion, maybe Brown gets hurt, maybe they stack the box and he doesn't, he's not quite as efficient. Or maybe one of these guys down here has a ceiling game. So Tucker, Vaughn, Sanders, maybe somebody else here in the 6K range. Who do you like in there?
Yeah, I hope PSU isn't listening because his ears might start bleeding. But if there was ever a week to play a running back and like 4 running backs, this is it, right? I mean, you could put it together a pretty nasty lineup if you play like Tucker, Sanders, Ibrahim, and Brown. And Rocket Sanders is too cheap too. I didn't know, like last week, obviously I wasn't on the show. I had some other things going on. So I didn't get to watch the Clemson-Syracuse game. But then when I was going through and doing my research this week, I'm like, something's got to be wrong with PFF. Sean Tucker only got 5 carries against Clemson. That's nuts to me. And so I think Dino Babers gets back to his bread and butter. And I'm high on Tucker. My running back pool is very small because I see no reason to punt at running back. Yeah. You've got all these surefire guys. I mean, and you don't have to break the bank. So Tucker is a great play. Deuce Vaughn, I'm somewhat away from him just because, like you said, Deuce, you're not going to admit a huge discount. I'll still have him. I still like him a lot. And Rocket Sanders is too cheap. They just refuse to adjust the guy's price. He got benched for about a quarter against BYU and still put up 32 points. I mean, these guys are all elite. Travion Henderson is the one GPP pivot I will say. I mean, that backfield is a mess for Ohio State. You never know what they're going to split, but also we have not seen Travion just go for, 20 and 180 and 3. So it's definitely on the pot. Like, he's a great GP, like that, 6% ownership or whatever on him. I don't think there's a huge separation between his upside and like Sanders and Vaughn. So Henderson is the one GPP play that no one's going to have here. But, there are 5-6 running backs above 6.9K. Then, and those make up my core. And it's just, you'll go down. We'll talk about some other options, but they're just a cream of the crop. And like you said, no need to overthink it with their floor and upside combos.
Yeah, totally agree. And there's enough other pivots there that it just the 6K range becomes a little bit of a dead zone. Miller at 65 or 6,300, I think is fine, but he's probably the only guy in that range that I'll have. And you can see as I scroll down the list here, there's not a whole lot for cheap guys. We'll come back up to this 5K range in a second. But if I go below 5K, just nobody really above 10% ownership except for maybe a couple spots. So the couple spots to discuss would be Florida State. We discussed them just briefly at the beginning of the show. Maybe Tank Bigsby, and then CJ Donaldson, who is just ridiculously cheap, and on FanDuel it's even worse. So talk about Bigsby, Donaldson, maybe what you're doing with Florida State here.
Yeah, Tank is a great pivot off of CJ Donaldson, and I don't know what it is. CJ scares me a lot here. I mean, last week, he got a lot of snaps. West Virginia did have some guys injured. They played from behind the whole game. Is he going to get a lot of carries? He doesn't need a lot of carries, right? We saw him earlier in the season just bust big runs, and I mean, he was getting 10 carries and still running for over 100 yards. So, that projection is there. You see the ownership. I'm probably just going to max the field and call it a day. I mean, we'll talk about him on FanDuel where he's 5,500, where he's a much easier play. But on DraftKings, I'm not going to really prioritize him. At least in the optimizer, I'm just going to say, hey, and I do this sometimes, right? If I like a guy, I mean, if I'm indifferent on a guy but he projects well, and I'm just like, look, because I trust, PSU's projections and in Turtle, so I'll just put 35 as a max, 1% as a min, and be like, hey, whatever it gives me, right? So that's one thing I'll probably do with Donaldson. We'll see where that lands, but I don't have a ton of him just because of the other running back options. Tank is a great pivot. I mean, we saw he's always dangerous. He finally got 20 carries against Ole Miss. He got a bye week. I like him as a GPP pivot off of Donaldson. And so, that game, if it shoots out, Tank is also involved in the passing game. They'll try to get him some targets. So I like Tank as a pivot off of him in GPPs. The only other guys I'll mention, Trey Benson and Lawrence Toafili. We mentioned them, last week. Basically the best game script they could 2 weeks ago. Sorry, where they had a bye week. Against Clemson, best game script for Toafili possible, right? He's their passing down back. He got a ton of snaps. They were playing from behind. Now same thing, kind of like Mo Ibrahim. Now you get a flip script, and you're playing a Georgia Tech team that Jeff Sims also was not warming up earlier. So they looked awful. When Virginia shuts you down, you got to reevaluate what you're doing. And so I love Trey Benson in GPPs today. You see that 3% ownership for him. I'm going to have well over the field, and I think he's a fantastic pivot. If you're going to punt down at running back, I think Benson is kind of a lock with Trayshawn Ward not warming up for 10 to 15 carries, and I think those snaps flip this game. So I definitely like Trey Benson here. Only other guy I'll mention cheap is Dejon Edwards. I know that's Ben's guy for Georgia, and he's splitting snaps with McIntosh, and if Kendall Milton's out, Florida's defense is atrocious. So he's another spot that you're going to punt. But what I'm doing is just limiting myself to one of these guys. I don't want two punts in my lineup. So if I'm going to try and fit in two studs, I'm just going to limit, put Benson, Edwards, and Toafili in a group and say I want one of those and just call it a day. So if I have to go low, I think Benson's my favorite play, sub 5K.
Yeah, I agree on Benson. I just think that given the potential for this game to be one that Florida State controls, you laid that out pretty well. At the ownership difference and the $700 in salary difference really doesn't mean a whole lot if you go cheap at quarterback. And there's some cheap pass catchers you can look at too. So like that call there as well. All right, let's move to wide receiver where we are going to see one chalk play at the top again this week with Hutchinson just not being priced up there at 7,900 and grading out clearly better than almost all of the other top end plays. You've got, he's 11 points projected better than Palmer, 7 better than Mims, 6 better than Harrison. You get the picture. So Hutchinson, clearly the wide receiver one today. I'm not sure, it's kind of like the Oklahoma situation on the other side, right? He should be getting a bigger price bump than that.
Yeah, I've struggled all week on what I'm going to do with Hutchinson. You see the 51% ownership.
That's don't think it's a big number for a receiver.
I don't think I think he comes in more closer to 40 just because, you see this, right? And ownership projections don't really get updated that much unless there's huge news that's going to swing it. So you get people that say, okay, Xavier Hutchinson, I don't want a ton of him. I want half the field. So if a lot of people go, okay, I want 25% of him, then, that just instantly lowers down his ownership. So I still think, like, is he a good play at 50%? My take on this game is that Iowa State knows that Oklahoma is very bad against the run. So I don't think Iowa State has been rotating back. So I don't want to play any Iowa State guys, but I think they know that they don't want Oklahoma's offense on the field. You saw what they did against Texas. Uh, does Xavier Hutchinson kill you if he catches 8 balls for 95 yards? No. And so, like, when you talk about these guys below him, even a Trey Palmer and Harrison, I'm not going to play Tyler Hudson at 7.3K. I don't know what happened there. But Quentin Johnson, A.T. Perry, in my mind, is just a fantastic GPP pivot. And it's not an identical one. But, I mean, he had a down game, only got 3 targets last week. They kind of blew out Boston College. This will be a closer game. I love A.T. Perry this week. And so Hutchinson, I am not going to full fade him. I would just say that you just have to think, are you giving up that big of a projection for that wide of a gap in ownership? You know, like, is he a double? Does it make sense for him to be double owned as Quentin Johnston? You know, you just kind of have to evaluate that. So I won't full fade Hutchinson. I will have well below the field. I think I'm probably going to have like maybe 10% or so. Like, I don't know what your take is. I have a hard time, and it is easy to say, you know, hour before lock. I have a hard time to see him just completely breaking the slate and being like, you have to have him to win in a lineup. So
Hutchinson or somebody else?
Hutchinson.
Yeah, I mean the you have to have him is 9 for 200 and a couple touchdowns.
Yeah.
You know, does he get there? Yeah, it's tough. He's very consistent. He's very good, but
he's a cash play. Like, if you're playing cash, you have to play him, I think.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
That, like, with wide receiver where it's at, like, his median projection, like, I think I will say his floor is probably 15 points. But, you know, for GPPs, I definitely think there are other options. But yeah, in cash, I think you just have to say, okay, I'm going to play him because he's going to be just locked in cash probably.
Yeah, no, I mean, and yeah, he'll be much higher owned, I think, in cash games. But yeah, at that ownership in GPPs, I can certainly see the case. I mentioned I like Hartman. We both kind of like Hartman, so Perry is logical. Johnston's been really good. You know, that game is pretty stackable with TCU and West Virginia if you wanted to go that route. The Ohio State guys, I think, are really interesting as well, with Smith and Jigba just being unable to shake that injury. And everyone says, you know, it's tough to figure out where the targets are going to go for Ohio State. Well, with Smith and Jigba most likely out again, it's just you got Ibuka and Harrison that are high upside plays for GPPs in their own right. I mean, Ohio State has pretty much been scoring at will. Tougher matchup today, but that's a really good offense and, you know, a Heisman statement game for Stroud. So I like those Ohio State guys in tournaments too. You know, Bowers has upside. He's always low floor, high ceiling kind of guy. So those are some of the pivots, and then they all got some ceiling.
Yeah, that you're exactly right. It's like, what are the chances on a slate that Ibuka outscores Hutchinson? Like, I'd say it's probably a coin flip, right? And so you get $1,000 discount. You mentioned JSN's out, and yeah, Ohio State's usually like, dang, who do I go with? But I mean, it's been Harrison and Ibuka. And so Cade Stover is a stone minimum if you want to play some of him here, who's out there for every snap, just is very touchdown variant. But yeah, all these guys are great pivots. I like Bryce Ford Wheaton as well for West Virginia. I think a lot of people are going to, you know, play the guy like Sam James and Caden Prather because they're $1,000 cheaper. But I like playing Ford Wheaton. Like, I think a stack, if you play like Duggan Johnston and run it back with Ford Wheaton, that's going to be a little bit different. But this is kind of a weird range. Brock Bowers, I mentioned in my article, right? Bowers had 11 fantasy points, I think like 11 and 5 fantasy points in his past couple games. Like, this is a Brock Bowers spot, right? So I like him. I'll be double the field on him just because I think that he's definitely got a chance to put up some points. Then Aronde Gadsden, if you haven't watched this guy play for Syracuse, he's at 6.1K. He's kind of like a tight end hybrid. Like, he's a specimen out there, and he's really started to be a connection with Garrett Schrader. So I think, you know, that stack is pretty cheap, and Gadsden's been putting up some points. So I like him as well. And I think those are probably like in the 6Ks. Once again, there's so many other pivots that you can play with that you can get off of Hutchinson a little bit below. So I think my favorite play in the 6Ks, you mentioned, is Ibuka. I think DraftKings, once again, like, is DraftKings ever going to make Ibuka like more than 7K? Like, Eric Gray's like stone cold 7.1K, 7.5K every week. And it's like, Ibuka, nah, we'll leave him at 6.9K. He hasn't been doing that well. So, yeah, I like him, and he's my favorite play in the 6Ks.
Yeah, I love the upside there as well, and I like Gadsden too. I tagged him up there at 6,100. Mayer is another guy for Notre Dame is just going to be in the same price range. They've kind of crept him up just a little, but not much. You already mentioned Prather a little bit. It's not an exciting range in the 5Ks. Sturdivant, another guy coming off a big week that might get some attention, but anybody you kind of like in this 5K range?
Yeah, Sturdivant's going to be the chalk. Like, I think he'll probably come in like the highest owned out of, I mean, him and Meyer really outside of Hutchinson. And Meyer's just like, once again, in cash, like, I think it'd be hard in cash to not start off with Meyer and Hutchinson. I think they've got the safest floors on the slate. I think Meyer got a TD called back last week. I mean, he's just a lock. For the most part, like in cash and a single entry. I mean, in GPPs, he's tough to fade just because he's getting so much volume. Yeah, and Sturdivant. So Jeremiah Hunter, one of the Cal's best receivers as well, sat last week. So that is one thing to monitor in the 2:30 games. I guess 3:30 Eastern is to make sure you see what's going on with Jeremiah Hunter. I don't think it knocks him J. Michael Sturdivant that much, but we'll get to a cheap Maven Anderson played a ton of snaps with Hunter out last week. So make sure you tune into that because if Hunter is playing, I still think Sturdivant's fine, but I probably Hunter is 5K, so I will probably transfer some shares from Sturdivant to Hunter if he is in fact in. I think he's got a projection there now, so it does ding Sturdivant a little bit, but I still like him as a play, and I think I'll just pivot some to Hunter. I'd rather just not leave Hunter in because he's lower in salary. Like he's easier to swap to. So I'm just going to build all my lineups with Sturdivant. I don't want them both in the lineup. And then if Hunter does come in, I'll just kind of evaluate how lineups are doing and get to plug him in. Yeah, Prather, Sam James, I can't quit him for West Virginia. So I think he's a decent play as well. But that kind of sums up the 5Ks. I think, Isaiah Williams also. I mentioned Chase Brown, but I think you could play Brown and Isaiah Williams in the lineup together. Nebraska's going to give up points. So Isaiah Williams at 5.8K is easy, the leader in targets. So I think he could get there as well at that cheap price point.
All right. If you're on to Arkansas receivers, Landers is a guy that I think is really interesting for GPPs. Not a safe play by any means, but some risk reward potential there in tournaments. I don't love a whole lot else, kind of under that 4,500 mark. Got to refresh that there. Hang on, let me get this refreshed and we can talk about some of the punts at wide receiver and also at running back. I kind of neglected to mention Brown for Rutgers at the Stowe minimum 3K. Did you mention him at all?
Yeah, no, I didn't. That's good because he's not in my pool, so he wasn't on my list.
Yeah.
Man, I think Brown is just like an easy fade. He was an easy fade for me. I mean, I know he got the carries, but playing at home against Indiana is a lot different than going on the road at Minnesota. And once again, on a different slate where you're like star for running back value, like if Ibrahim's 9.5K, but like I'm not going to have any of Brown. I just can't get there. And I mean, I'd understand if you want to punt there, but I won't have any of him.
All right, let's talk about go back to receiver here. And you can see the two guys that we mentioned as kind of cash locks are the top two in terms of point per dollar, but you don't see a whole lot. Usually you get some 3K guys popping in here. Anderson, who you already kind of mentioned at 3,500, but there's not a whole lot in that 3K wide receiver range today. Is there anybody that maybe you want to highlight?
Ugh. I mean, it's kind of bad once you get down. Like when I have, I was talking to Turtle about this last night. When I have John, why can't I look? John Samuel Shanker in my player pool. Like, this slate has gone off the rails. The tight end for Auburn. Maven Anderson, once again, that's what's tough is, Maven Anderson is a decent play. I think now we have him projected with Hunter, so he's not popping as much as he has, but there's really not much to pivot to. I think not a great play, great in the context of the slate is Cade Stover at the dead min for Ohio State. I mean, there's definitely a chance that he puts up 2 to 3 fantasy points, but like you just really need him to get like at the wide receiver the value this week to plug in all the running backs. Like you just need someone to catch a touchdown, so even if Stover puts up like a 2 for 25 and a touchdown, like you'll take that. So I like Stover at the Stone min. And so I think he'd punt, but once again, like you're just going to try and have to find like these middle range plays, like in the low 5Ks up to 6Ks. And so that's also why I but don't want to play Hutchinson as much because on the receivers, there are just so many good options in that 6K range that you don't have to really punt all the way. You can just play like 3 mid-range options and be good to go.
Yeah, totally agree. In the context of the slate, makes all the sense in the world to build that way today. and with the cheap options at quarterback. All right, let's go pivot this over to FanDuel like we usually do before we get out of here. We can talk about some of the late games. Not the most exciting set of later games that we've seen, but Tennessee, obviously, their offense has been a big surprise this year, huge upside. They've got potentially their top wide receiver coming back this week. You've got Michigan with a huge team total against a woeful Michigan State defense. Pitt and UNC could potentially shoot out because UNC doesn't stop anybody. Who are some of your favorite plays in these later games on the FanDuel slate?
So this is perfect because PSU's talking about this in the Discord, and I went back and forth with them on this week. So Cedric Tillman is going to be back for Tennessee in this one. He is $7K on FanDuel, which is the equivalent of him being like $4.8K on DraftKings. He's been out for almost a month and a half, and I think that they've sat him out long enough to where they're not going to bring him back like on a snap. Like you don't bring him back in the Kentucky game to be on a snap count. Like you bring him back last week against who they played, Tennessee Martin, on a snap count to just get him out there and going to run 20 plays or something. I think he's a steal on FanDuel. He's not going to project very well, and PSU will tell you opposite. But that's just why we love DFS, because you get to pick your stances. And if I'm wrong, I'll be wrong. But I think right now they have him projected for 1% owned, and I hope that stays that way. I don't think you can play Jalen Hyatt at that. Like it all depends, right? Hyatt has been on an insane run. You saw him break the slate a couple weeks ago.
If you think that's really expensive,
if you think Tillman is just out there as a decoy and they just want to run him out and he only runs a couple snaps, I think Hyatt's viable. Brew McCoy is also viable, but my stance is going to be that Cedric Tillman isn't like, maybe he doesn't play all the snaps that he usually does, but at 7K, I mean, he's Hooker's number one guy. So I like Tillman a lot on FanDuel. I almost tried to get there in my main, but I couldn't. On Kentucky, Chris Rodriguez is the only play for me. I think Kentucky is going to try and run the ball as much as they can, and Rodriguez is really going to be the focal point there, I think. Michigan State and Michigan, Jaden Reed's the only play for me on Michigan State. I think he is very cheap, though. I mean, I think he's going to get a ton of volume in this game. Whether or not they're just down like 40-0 is the question. And then Michigan's all cheap. JJ McCarthy, 7.5K. He's your punt quarterback if you want to on Michigan. I think on Ole Miss, it would have been really nice to know that, we've been trying to nail the Ole Miss backfield all season long. It's been a split backfield. And so last week it was like, okay, you can play Judkins or Evans, pick which one. And then all of a sudden Evans just doesn't play and Judkins, gets all the carries. So right now I think Evans is projected in. He does have a knee issue. He is from the Houston area. So I'd be interested if he probably wants to play in this game a lot. So if they go back to a split, I think Judkins is still viable, but he takes a hit. I would expect that if Evans doesn't go, he becomes a great play on FanDuel. So I do have a lot of him. At least at the beginning, and when I say a lot, like 15%, try to double the field on him. Texas A&M is going to start Connor Wegman tonight, true freshman. He is free on DraftKings on FanDuel, so if you think he is going to do anything, now's the time. But Evan Stewart is too cheap. Devin Achane's too cheap. So even though that offense is it's weird that you want to play guys in an offense that's so bad.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're so consolidated. So I mean, Stewart is basically free there as well, along with Moose Muhammad. Pittsburgh, Abanikanda, Izzy is finally on a main slate that I can play. I mentioned that in my article this week that I was on him last year. I remember I was on him last year when everyone's on Addison and I was on Abanikanda, and I'll let you know how that turned out. But this year, I mean, he's getting all the carries. This is a dream matchup for him. He was out there for I think he missed one snap against Louisville last week. I mean, just play him. Like we mentioned CJ Donaldson too. He is 5.5K here. If you're playing single entry or cash, I think you just have to play him and walk away. And Abanikanda is probably too cheap as well. And then the UNC side, they've got probably the best quarterback on this slate, and Drake May, and he's priced like it. So, but I mean, this kid's a stud. So I like this game to shoot out. It is the last game of the slate, and you guys know how I like that one. So him and Josh Downs are probably the only options from that team. But FanDuel, not necessarily the most appetizing games, but I mean, a lot of these target games are target condensed, so you really know who to pick out. So
I know who's getting the ball for these teams for sure.
Yeah, so I think it's a fun slate, and so and they don't have some of the DraftKings earlier games, so you don't have Ibrahim. Chase Brown, you can see he's priced up here. I think he's the highest priced running back And so this just shows, like, I always use it sometimes as validation. Like, Chase Brown should be 8.5K on DraftKings, and that's exactly what he is here. And then you'll see Rocket Sanders priced up a little bit, but Abanikanda is the best play of the slate. And I think playing a Abanikanda and CJ Donaldson is going to be pretty popular just because it lets you basically build whatever lineup you want.
All right, I think you broke that FanDuel stuff down pretty well. I don't see, let's see, the Discord will keep you posted on updates and answer your questions there. If you are a premium subscriber, check that out. We give you this show each and every week for free on the YouTube channel, and be sure to leave us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you like what you see, and you can get a notification anytime we go live. And if you want the up-to-date, real-time news leading up to kickoff, you can hop into our RotoGrinders Discord and get yourself a premium subscription to get access to that. So anything else, Micah, before we get out of here and call it a week?
No, I think just the one thing we talked about earlier, Jeff Sims is ruled out. So, if you had a lot of Jeff Sims lineups, please keep them in.
Rethink your strategy.
Yeah, if you might want to try to like unreserve your lineups if you have some Jeff Sims lineups going in. But no, I'm interested to see how this one plays out, because I think this whole slate kind of revolves around Xavier Hutchinson, because I think that if he goes out there and smashes, it's going to be okay. Now, how are you going to fit the rest of your lineup in? So I think it's just really going to be Xavier Hutchinson. And what is he going to do in those first games? So I'll be watching that game pretty closely, and just, like I said, I'm not going to completely fade him, but I'll be way underweight on him. So I will know, like usual, I'll know where I stand pretty early in the afternoon. So, but make sure you stay tuned on that Cal situation. I think is the biggest on the slate, the Cal wide receiver. So if Jeremiah Hunter, I think that's the main thing for the 2:30 games. I think Adrian Martinez is already going to be I would be surprised if he plays. And so I think you can pretty safely have Will Howard in, but this is college football, so you never know what's going to happen. So should be a fun slate. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we found out the last few weeks. You never know what might happen, so stay tuned if you've got some players and are interested in those later games. And with that, we'll go ahead and get out of here, and we hope you all have a great weekend. For Micah, for Steve, our producer, working hard behind the scenes for us, we appreciate that as well. Have a great weekend, everybody. For Micah and Steve, I'm Justin. Enjoy your weekend. We will see you back here next week, same time, same place. Take care, everybody.